Welcome to a discussion on the importance of the Academy's role in the society. My name is Willy Silberstein, and I'm very happy to host this discussion. And you are the experts on yourselves. So I suggest we start with you. Who are you in just one sentence, and then we'll go through here.
One sentence, okay. Ole Petter Ottersen, I'm the president of Karolinska Institute. I've been so for 5 years. That was 2 sentences.
And my name is Sofia Eriksson Watersgoed. I'm director for youth education and Erasmus Plus in the European Commission, so based in Brussels.
I am Andriy Plakhatnyuk. I am ambassador of Ukraine to Sweden. I've been here in Stockholm for 1 year and a half.
And of course, we're very happy that all 3 of you are here. And we're a bit, to be honest, extra honored that you, the ambassador of a country at war, take your time. And it says something that you do come here to discuss academia. So we're just as happy that you're here, of course, but it gives one extra dimension. And I warn you, I will use only your first names. Don't faint. We're in Sweden. So since ancient times, universities and academia have been the place for discussion and conversation. Do you see a risk that academia is or will be weakened? Andriy, what do you say?
I fully agree that academia has always played a very important role when it comes to be a place for discussions and liberty to present his or her own views. And we definitely hope that it will be so for many generations to come. But it's not the case for all the countries.
Sofia, do you see a risk that academia will lose a leading role in many societies?
Yeah, well, academia is absolutely essential for democracies, and I don't think any real democracy can function well without functioning academias, with academic freedom and institutional freedom. And if we look at the very turbulent times today, I would say that, be it there are transformations, we have a war in Europe, we need more as ever strong standing academia to participate in societal discussions and outreach. But if we look at the development worldwide, there is a risk that we go in the wrong direction.
Ole Petter, do you see this risk too?
Well, I think that more than ever, there is a need for academia and for an academic dialogue. So I'm very grateful for having this opportunity to take part in this dialogue here.
And if you would sort of give us a picture, in what way would you say that academia in our world is threatened today?
In fact, what we see at our university as the #1 challenge and risk now is that the entire, or at least part of the academic, international, global community breaks down because of the turbulence in today's world. In fact, we have established an international council to address these specific questions, how to keep up the international academic community in this turbulent world of ours.
And in a concrete manner, what would you say are the threats?
Well, there are many threats, obviously. Academic freedom is one of them. And of course, what we are seeing is also, and it's understandable in many ways, that academia is being used as an instrument of power, referring to academic sanctions. Of course, it's understandable that sanctions also now are broadened to involve the academia, but the long-term consequences might be very, very difficult. And, you know, under the pandemic, what did we see? The entire global academic community, it exchanged data, information, reagents. It was a true joint effort on the part of the entire academic community. Imagine if this community breaks down and a new crisis comes. Then the virus or whatever will get an even more pronounced head start than it got this time around.
And Ole Petter even speaks of a breakdown, which is a very strong word. Would you use that word as a threat? Is there a risk of an academic breakdown?
Probably I wouldn't use that word.
What would you use?
Let me think about it.
Okay. Sofia, what do you say? Do you see a risk of an academic breakdown?
Well, I think there's no yes or no answer to that question.
That's an academic answer.
Well, yes. There are always two sides of things, of course. So I would say, yes, we are in very turbulent times. We have big threats in our neighborhood, just to take that as a really flagrant example. So, of course, that doesn't help the academic debate, and it doesn't help the truthful or the nuanced and the in-depth reflections that a society really needs. So I think that is an increasing threat. But at the same time, you see, of course, a tendency that there is a wish for a new reflection or a deeper reflection of our societies. What society do we want to live in tomorrow? What are the challenges that we are ready to tackle? So you see also a wish, I would say, especially for the younger generation, that they see this clearly where we want to go. So you need to bring the two together. So I wouldn't be saying that we are doomed to fail in the academic or in the more globally speaking, in the academic outreach and the academic freedom. But there is a risk, there's a tendency, and it calls for action. And I would bring it back to the role of society and perhaps the role of universities in making this happen, contributing to a nuanced debate and contributing to a fact-based debate.
Yeah.
Because very often...
I wrote that down. We will come back to call for action. Ole Petter, I still would like, can you be concrete? Who would gain from an academic breakdown?
Gain from an academic breakdown? Nobody will, obviously.
But who could still have that as a sort of element to play on to try to get somewhere?
Well, now we're touching upon the delicate balance that we have seen after the 24th of February. I should add, by the way, before proceeding, that talking about academic network, we have, as we speak, more or less, a very strong international collaboration with Bogomolets University, not least in Kyiv. So we have a telemedicine collaboration with your very, very good university in Kyiv, just to as a digression. Now, it's a very delicate balance we're talking about here. And the EU is, of course, also instrumental in this regard. What we are discussing now in academia and also with our expert council is how to proceed when it comes to the effects of academic sanctions. So I have to go back to that. Academic sanctions is something that have been imposed on academia, as you all know, after the 24th of February. And academic sanctions, what will be the long-term consequences of those? We simply don't know. I must say that it's very, very fair to discontinue collaborations on an institutional level with institutions in countries that are aggressors in conflicts like Russia now. But individual collaborations, that's another thing entirely. And I think we should be very, very careful when it comes to imposing sanctions that also affect individual collaborations in the global academic community, because this will have long-term consequences. And what will happen during the next crisis? This is a slippery slope.
And maybe a crisis that we see now should, in one way, call for more cooperation. The need for academia in Russia, for instance, must be much greater today than it was before February 24th. Isn't that the dilemma?
Well, let's put this on a more general level. I would say that we need to reflect much more on how to collaborate with authoritarian regimes or nations that have authoritarian regimes. I mean, the last democracy index of The Economist, as you know, the top tier of full democracies, less than 8% of the population in the world are living in the top tier of full democracies. Perhaps 50% are now in countries with authoritarian regimes. If we don't know how to tackle academic collaborations with those regimes, we are lost. So what is so important, I think, is also to remember that scientists in many authoritarian regimes, they are living in a situation where academic collaboration sits like oxygen to them. They are breathing oxygen when they are allowed to get in touch and communicate with scientists in the more democratic countries. We should not forget this.
Andrei, what do you say about this?
Well, I would like to reflect on one thing. Definitely when it comes to support that our academics now feel, and it comes from Sweden, we're definitely very much grateful because it's a global challenge and a challenge especially for our scientists. When it comes to this challenging times with such global threats and global changes, when the world entered this turbulent period of its development, it's really very important, and I totally agree with the position of Swedish government to support the civil society for example, in Russia. They should be definitely supported, but at the same time we should clearly understand that as of now we can trust or we cannot trust the opinion polls being conducted there, but more than 80% of people support the crimes committed by Putin regime in Ukraine. More than 80%. And it has always been difficult to distinguish and to tell where academics support the government and support the regime and where it doesn't support and tries to be independent and tries to produce ideas and tries to produce new contents for future discussions in the society. For example, we all know that many of the Russian scientists who did not support the regime, they tried to leave the country and tried to move abroad in order to continue their studies and to contribute to our joint development and to our joint progress. But at the same time, a lot of things that now happen in Russia, they work for the support of their country and their regime. So it's a kind of very, very important at the same time difficult balance that should be kept in mind when we are talking about future academic cooperation with Russian institutions. Because what we see that, and I can tell you that according to my understanding, according to my perception, the government and the ruling class in Russia has never cared about ordinary people. Never. It has never been the case for them. The only thing they've been caring about is how to project their power, be it political power, be it foreign policy, be it security, be it military power, to all neighboring countries and to the countries that they can reach. So it's a long way for us to go when it comes to supporting academics, when it comes to support civil society, and it will take us tremendous efforts to make democracy develop in the Russian society.
Sophia, on an EU level, there is a lot of isolation now of Russia. Is this a dilemma, would you say? I mean, as Ole Petter said, in a way we maybe should cooperate more. I don't know if you said that or if it's my interpretation, but still, could you elaborate on this dilemma?
Yes, sure. Well, you are probably aware there has been a number of sanctions packages from the European Union against the Russian regime. And in one of the recent ones, there was specifically also a line on the cooperation with the academic or research or education cooperation. So specifically the EU programs where until now Russia could participate in different partnerships and the mobilities and so on. And clearly here there was a clear line of actually terminating cooperation partnerships with those institutions which are publicly controlled or publicly owned, because there will never be a free debate, free cooperation. But important to say that, of course, and I think this is always what happens, that you can have still fruitful debates people to people. So there are, of course, the people-to-people aspects are kept. They are not being part of the sanctions package. But cooperation as such with the institutions which fall into this definition, they are now terminated. And that goes for higher education, education, research.
Would you say this is a dilemma? That in a way, they should speak more to the rest of Europe and listen more to an institution like the EU, which is a very democratic institution, instead of isolating them?
Well, I don't have a very firm view, of course, because I don't know how things happen really on the ground in Russia. I don't know who knows that. What we can see that there are, what we hear that there are, of course, very big sanctions and punishments for those academics that may express views that are not in line with the official view. And it's very difficult, if we're talking about academic freedom and institutional freedom, to have a fact-based and evidence-based discussion. So I think the best bet is probably to develop the people-to-people contacts, and then we will see.
Yeah. Ole Petter?
It's amazing how fast we forget. We had a meeting on this very issue not a long time ago, and scientists who experienced the Cold War, they got back to the situation then. And, you know, even though the situation was different, still the same discussion came up during the Cold War. Should we abstain from collaborating with authoritarian regimes or not? And there was a scientist, not only one, but several, who came to the fore and said explicitly that during the Cold War, the opportunity that was in place to be in touch with scientists in the free world, that was, as I said, more or less like oxygen. It made them survive the Cold War. And what was said explicitly is that if these collaborative links were not in place, perhaps they would be pushed towards the authoritarian regime and rather be more supportive of them than less supportive of them. So I think we have to put this into a historical perspective and learn from what happened during also the Cold War.
And Andrei, I mean, you represent a country that I guess wants as much isolation as possible when it comes to Russia. What do you say about the dilemma that Ole Petter points at? And lessons from the Cold War, which are very interesting.
Lessons from Cold War are definitely very interesting. But, you know, we have two different perceptions here when it comes to the collapse of Soviet Union, that Iron Curtain, and many things that were expected on the both sides of the continent. On the one side here, the people, the European, the Western countries were expecting that democratization would come to Russia. And a lot of things were made in order to bring Russia closer to all the new reality, and to bring it to the civilized world. But what we see on the other hand, at the beginning of the 90s, there were kind of democratic processes unfolding in Russia. And after that, in the 2000s, when current president entered and took power, he tried to consider the collapse of the Soviet Union as the major geopolitical, problem, and he's still accusing the Western countries of doing bad things to Russia, on trying to destroy Russia, to topple government, and many more things. So many things were done by academics. I'm confident of that. A lot of new programs were developed, especially for the new countries that developed and emerged after the Soviet Union collapsed. Many of them used this unique opportunity to have closer interaction between universities, within various programs, within these frameworks of different funds. But at the same time, what we see now, that there are still a lot of things going in Russia, And definitely, I would totally agree with the attitude that the European community, the European Union, now is implementing. That we should clearly distinguish where it's people-to-people exchange, where the people and the scientists can work freely and produce something good for the benefit of all humankind. And when it comes to institutions that are controlled by the Russian government, support their policies and produce not so many results when it comes to science and when it comes to progress.
It's okay, don't worry, you can be there. It's a little tool for the sound. So, Sophia, is there a risk we all have Google and we have a constant flow of new information that this will actually reduce the interest for deep knowledge and academia?
Yes, sorry to be always looking at the two sides, but
That's okay.
that question triggers, I think, also looking back the last 2 years now of a pandemic. I think we've seen a great development, an accelerated development of the whole digital transformation of the education sector. And that goes not only for higher education, it goes for all levels of education, certainly for school education as well. And we've seen that new pedagogies have been introduced, teachers have been embracing this, we have new platforms, and it has been a very accelerated pace of learning, both for the learners and for the teachers. But of course, there's always the other side of the coin, and now I think we are in this process of looking at the lessons learned, certainly for what happened during the pandemic, what worked well, what didn't work so well. We have to, I think, learn from that when going forward. And there are, of course, new challenges that come with the development of artificial intelligence and simply trying to understand what happens when we might not have the digital skills that we should have for the whole level of population, and how far are teachers prepared and so on. So this is I would say, we cannot say no to this development, and we should embrace it. But we have probably to give more attention to the risks with it, and while embracing it. And I think we're doing that, certainly from the Commission side. We have tabled a lot of initiatives. We have a digital decade, digital agenda, and in the education sphere we have what we call the Digital Education Action Plan that tries to look into this, both the positive sides and the risks. I would suggest that this is a topic where the academia can really bring some novelties and help in the risks or the potential gains that we are facing. It could be a good topic for societal outreach, that academia can take perhaps an increasing role while we are learning and drawing these lessons.
And Ole Petter, what do you see? I mean, Google can, of course, contribute to attract attention, increase knowledge. Do you see the risk that at the same time we lose or reduce interest in deep knowledge in a society?
I love that expression, deep knowledge.
Okay.
This is exactly what is needed. And even, I think it was just 2 days ago, I was involved in a discussion about this exact issue, deep knowledge. Look at what happens when it comes to reading books, for example, on a worldwide basis. I think we have forgotten about the value of deep knowledge, of not just
the value
of deep knowledge, as you say. I mean, the world has changed into a tabloid world, as we know. And to read more than 10, 15 lines is a challenge for many. So we have to go back, try to go back to exactly what you are alluding to, that we have to be able to go much, much more into the depth of the issues that we are discussing. This is one way of doing this, and allowing 1 hour to discuss issues that normally are discussed in debates lasting 10 minutes. But there is one very important lesson, I think, from the pandemic when it comes to this. And that is the need for the human touch, the human relationship. I think that we should embrace much of what has happened during the pandemic. I mean, we have seen that there is a need and a possibility for flexibility in the learning situation. Obviously, we should embrace the new technologies. And the reason why we can collaborate with your university in Kyiv is simply because we have this new technology. But at the same time, and it takes perhaps years until we see how important it is, we must not forget that we are human beings. I'm a brain scientist. I know how much of the communication that we have between us as human beings are coupled to our actual presence in the same room. We must not forget this. And the danger I see is that there is no problem staying in the, the virtual space for months, perhaps even a couple of years, but the long-term effect of not being in real life, the long-term effect might be very serious. So I really think it's a good thing we come back to this situation. We should take with us some of the technologies and the advances that we have seen on the technology level during the pandemic, but we should not forget that we are human beings.
In a tabloid world, I will remember that expression, which is says a lot. So, Andri, if academia had been more independent, had played a bigger role in Russia, would your country be at war today, do you think? I know nobody knows, but I would still like to have your thoughts on this.
Nobody knows. You're so right saying that. But definitely, as a neighboring country to Russia, as Ukrainians who have always had good friendly relations with Russian people, and it was our genuine position of all people, definitely, if the Russian civil society, if the Russian academics were free and independent in their country, definitely we would have a better situation when it comes to perception of Ukraine, when it comes to acceptance us by the Russian society and Russian people as a sovereign state and a good and neighborly country. I don't think, frankly speaking, that it would change a lot the position of the government. Once again, that they have never been genuine freedom in Russia. When it comes to Ukraine, I can recall two words that describe our nation. It's freedom and dignity. So when it comes to the Russian Federation, definitely we should pick up some other words, and when it comes to Russian society. But at the same time, definitely, if the academics were free, if they had the possibility to provide new ideas that would be accepted and further implemented by their government, definitely the situation would be better. But I'm not sure that we could evade war.
Ole Peter, do you have any
thoughts? I would be reluctant to confine or restrict this question to academia, tertiary education alone, because what we are talking about now is education at large. And I've been reflecting on this question of yours, and I think it's time that we look at the balance in the entire educational system between focusing on skills like mathematics and language, important skills, obviously, but contrasting with the skills, the democratic skills, that also have to be center stage along the entire educational system. I know, and we all know, that this balance has been shifted in the right direction in many places in the world, towards more focus on democratic skills. But I think it has to be even more directed to the understanding now that should we really use our educational system to preserve democracy around the world, there must be an even stronger focus on those skills.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, division of power, so important an issue when it comes to the understanding of democracies. I think that, and I saw an investigation on this, I think that it's disappointing to see how few pupils who leave the school really understand the importance of this simple term, division of power. And we have seen even in one of our oldest democracies on the other side of the Atlantic, how division of power might be subjected to severe challenges from the leadership. And I think if there was a stronger base in the society as to the understanding of the importance of the division of power, perhaps the leadership would have had a much more difficult time to try to erode the division of power in the USA.
Sofia, you mentioned before you see a need for a call for action when it comes to freedom of academia and so on. Now, what is on your list for call for action?
Well, we try to do what we can from the European level, of course, while respecting, we are here under complementary competence, which is the correct word from the EU treaties. So the Commission can complement and supplement efforts, because we see that, of course, a lot of what we're talking about, there are efforts, certainly if we speak in the European sphere. What we can do is to add on and try to perhaps accelerate some of the actions. And we have a recent strategy that came out in January, a European strategy for universities, where you will find a lot what we are discussing about. You will find a strong dimension on supporting, helping universities in coping in this turbulent world, and including when it comes to where we stand on academic freedom and fundamental values and the protection of democracy. So, of course, we can, through our programs, through more soft ways of cooperation, exchanges, mutual learning, inspiration between countries. There are things that we can contribute with. And we have powerful programs that have recently been added extra budgets, be it from the Erasmus Plus and the Horizon Europe side. So you have the full menu of tools at European level, from, I would say, early childhood education and care, school education, higher education, adult learning, and of course the big part of research and innovation.
If I may be a bit impolite, what do you say to people who claim, the EU, they're in an ivory tower in Brussels, they make their programs, but when it comes to reality, it doesn't happen that much. What do you say to that?
Well, I could question that quite forcefully, because with the small tools that we have available, we have some really great successes. If you ask today what people know about the EU, typically they will say, oh, they know that it's a peace project, they know about the euro, and they know about Erasmus. So this says something that Erasmus being, well, taking that as an example, it is celebrating 35 years this year. And many, perhaps, people in the room, in the audience, including myself, have benefited from this experience. And we always say that Erasmus opens eyes and changes lives. And from all the individual stories that we see and hear every day in my job, I can confirm that this is the case. And this kind of people-to-people contact, we're back to that, and the people-to-people contacts are, in a way, the consequence of very firm and strong cooperation that exists between education institutions. They really bear the fruit, and of course the impact you see, that people are more open, and they actually get, I think, a better understanding what it means to live in an open society and understand our common European values.
And Andrei, I mean, your country, we know, wants to be a member of the EU. Sofia's list, would that make a change in your country if it would be implemented in Ukraine?
It would definitely contribute to achieving our final goal. And when it comes to this challenging times, when it comes to the times of war, it's definitely we rely very much on our foreign friends and international partners. When it comes to institutions, when it comes to universities, we definitely are in favor of deepening the cooperation. the cooperation and scientific exchanges, participating in various kind of programs, not only within the EU framework, but also bilaterally with all other countries. And definitely, I'm confident that we should learn from the lessons of pandemic, how to tackle and how to overcome these challenges when it comes to educational process, and definitely implement some new ideas on how to make this process move smoothly.
We see another, which I would call a threat, a mix-up between facts and ideas. For instance, it was an opinion whether there were many people at the inauguration of Donald Trump as a president. Facts were not as interesting in some circles as opinions. Is this a big issue when it comes to discussing democracy, academia, and so on?
Absolutely. This is spot on what you're raising as an issue now. What we see today, I think, is a situation where we have parallel realities. We don't have the same reference frame when we're discussing things. And you know, going back to the academic dialogue is based on the principle that the discussion takes as the vantage point, a reference frame that we can agree upon. This is what makes academic dialogue today so difficult, because we have different realities, different worlds, so to speak. And looking at what happens in not only in the US, but also in other countries, that you select the information channel of your choice, the information channel that reflects your own opinion to start with. And this, of course, reinforces your own opinion. So if you lose the whole picture, you are sort of focusing and imprisoned in your own opinions.
And how far have we come on this downhill road that you described now? Are we at the beginning, or will it change, or what do you see?
Well, I think we see, for example, this issue coming up when it comes to a very relevant issue, and that is vaccine hesitancy, where there are parallel realities, different facts or perceived facts. I think we have to develop a much more, I'm sorry to use this term, aggressive stance on how to change this into building a more general common reference frame. Instead of blocking false information, which I think is impossible, is to counteract, to attack the wrong information, misinformation, false facts, as we could call them. And this is very much the task of the university. With some self-criticism, I think we haven't been active enough on this arena. We should develop a strategy that is much more focused on counteracting misinformation with other information, keeping to the truth.
But at the same time, Sofia, for instance, in the EU, in Sweden for sure, and many other countries, we have these so-called information bubbles. If you're against vaccines, you go to your own channels just to get your biased picture confirmed, and the other groups as well. How would you tackle this?
Well, it's such a pertinent discussion. I mean, this whole idea of what is an opinion, what is a fact-based discussion or fact-based debate. Clearly, we have to consider education. We have talked about that before. It has a really important role from a very early age to have this awareness of the risks and be able to distinguish a scientific fact from an opinion. I mean, sometimes even a researcher will have their own opinions, but it's important to understand that we have this difference. And education needs to start and the awareness needs to start early of what is, let's say, the media literacy, the digital literacy. It's really important. But perhaps a way, and I would agree here with what you just said, that perhaps the academia could take a stronger role in
Stronger.
role, and I'm thinking academia or journals or publications are typically valued also career-wise in an international context. But perhaps what is missing is a dimension which is more local, that you would see researchers and the scientific groups to be more active in a local setting, also in the local language. Because we have an issue of outreach, which is perhaps not ideal, and taking a bigger part in the societal discussion, also at the local level, mixing with whatever local issues is up for the moment. I think that is a gap that we can observe today. And probably universities, higher education institutions can do better on that if we are self-critical.
Andriy, do you have these information bubbles also in Ukraine?
Well, when it comes to our current situation that we've been living for the last 8 years, definitely the facts and the fact-finding and the fact-checking, especially when it comes to disinformation that is widely disseminated by foreign media, I would say, it's really very important. And definitely, I would totally agree that academia should play a very important role when young students can understand and can learn how to distinguish between opinion and between the fact, and how to double-check the information, because it's really very important, and it's really what can influence the public opinion. It can trigger different kind of processes, but in our case, this information and once again, the fact-finding is very, very important. And the state and the civil society is very, very cautious and pays a lot of attention to the information that is being provided, which should be verified and which can be trusted. And in this regard, a lot of origins of informations and the possibility to go and check in the different media outlets, it's also very important. And what is more important when it comes to information and informational warfare, which we also suffer from, is that despite the war, despite that we are engaged in everyday hostilities with Russia, at the same time, the government and the state does its best to keep the freedom of speech and the freedom of media in this situation. And this is also very, very important.
Why is that so important in a time of war?
It's important because people should have access to information. It's their right to have this access, to understand and to make their own conclusions. And we try to not to limit their access to information. Definitely we have put Russian media outlets under sanctions because they are totally engaged in disinformation campaigns and producing false news, false information and fake news. But at the same time, when it comes to media coverage of the current situation and to the access of people to different media, we enjoy, I think, full freedom.
I'd like to hear from the three of you, if we sit here in 5 years from today and discuss the situation of academia and academic freedom, what do you think you will describe, Ole Petter?
Well, one thing is academic freedom, another thing is institutional autonomy, and I think we touched upon institutional autonomy already. And perhaps I would be even clearer now in this part of the discussion and saying that institutional autonomy has been attacked during this crisis. I think it's absolutely an issue that we should reflect upon when, as I said, universities have been used as an instrument of power, sanctioning Russia. Institutional autonomy is a very, very important part of the fabric of society, I would say. We are talking about the division of power, even though academia is not formally a power. It should be seen as one. So you should not interfere with the institutional autonomy. It's a fine balance. Please, in the future, keep away from using universities as an instrument of power. So when you're looking 5 years ahead, I hope we have reflected to such an extent that we knew that this was not the right way to proceed. We have to protect institutional autonomy. When it comes to academic freedom, what really strikes me is that we don't know enough about what is academic freedom and what is it good for. There was, in fact, a survey of Swedish universities not long time ago. Terence Karen, a very well-known researcher on academic freedom based in the UK, he did a survey here in Sweden and in all the Nordic countries. And it turns out that even academics, very few of them know what academic freedom is all about. They say, even again, a bit of self-criticism, they say that when they left the universities, they were not really up to date. They hadn't been sufficiently informed about the nature and value of academic freedom. So we have to improve on that point. If we don't, the situation will not be very good in 5 years from now. And what is the most important thing is that the political decision makers understand what is academic freedom. It's not a privilege for the few. I would say it's a must for the many. It's a prerequisite for societal development. So we have a tremendous challenge ahead of us if we are to sit here in 5 years and have an intact and perhaps an even better academic freedom and institutional autonomy.
Sophia, take up your crystal ball. Look,
Yes,
5 years from today, what do you see?
Well, I started, I think, in my first reply to your first question. I was mentioning that we are really living in turbulent times and with big transitions in front of us, green, digital, and the geopolitical situations that we've touched a lot upon. So this is happening now. So my wish, perhaps, or how I hope things will evolve for 5 years ahead of us, I obviously believe that, or I hope that we will have managed, thanks to academia and the society as a whole, to overcome, or at least come to some good progress on many of these challenges and transformations. And I'm sure that we will absolutely need more cooperation to get there. We will not need less cooperation, and we will be able, I think, to stick to the institutional autonomy, and the academic freedom, of course, should be there, but the institutional autonomy is absolutely essential, as has been said. But we can still cooperate more, and we have seen the more we cooperate, we are actually able to also come sometimes even to common solutions to these common challenges. And we have some flagship initiatives that we hope can help, and we have Karolinska Institutet being part of one of them. We call them the European University Initiatives. It's a kind of high ambitious alliances between universities, and the purpose is really to work together on these common challenges. And we have some recent Ukrainian universities that are also part of some of the alliances. So if we manage to go in this direction, I would say maybe the problems we've discussed today will not be solved, but we will hopefully have gotten quite a strong or a far way.
I think you had a comment to this.
Yes, because this is turning into a very interesting discussion also when it comes to the role of the European Union. If we are to preserve the global academic community, I think we are all for this, we have to be absolutely clear that international academic cooperation must be based on the same set of values. Because you cannot really have an international academic cooperation with different sets of values in different parts of the world. So when we have a representative here now of the European Union, I would say it's very dangerous to use the term European values as is being used in many of the strategic documents from the European Union. Because if you do this, the question comes, how about the African values, the Asian values? If we don't have the same value platform, international academic cooperation is impossible. So a direct question to you, why not refer to the universal values embedded, for instance, in the Declaration of Human Rights? I mean, there is a number of documents that relate to the world at large. Why not refer to them instead of distancing ourselves from other parts of the world by using the term European values?
Sophia,
it's a
you
difficult
must
thing.
pick up on this.
Yes, of course. No, and clearly we live in the context we are living in, and speaking of the Europe, we have a very, very close integration, and we have our treaties, we have our charters, and we have established common values in those documents. So it's normal that, of course, when we talk about European cooperation, we refer to those values. But as you know, EU is also a strong believer in global cooperation. And
but do you agree there is a risk when you say European values that you sort of distance Africa, Asia, and so on?
No, I don't think there is a risk. Because we have this strong cooperation from many years behind us. In Europe, we have strong cooperation of international cooperation. I think it's not so much referring which document of values we are talking about. I think it's about cooperating, and we will discover as well that we are sharing much more values than we perhaps did not know in advance. And I should add perhaps that the whole the idea with our flagship initiative of European universities is also to it's a very close cooperation. It's almost like systemic cooperation actually between universities across borders. But of course we need to start somewhere, and then we see already now that many of these alliances that started 2-3 years ago, they are taking steps also to engage with global partners. But of course we need a good foundation first.
Finally, you start to disagree. I love this.
I would beg to disagree. I mean, a meeting a few years ago with our African colleagues, the term European values came up, and one of our African colleagues stood up and said, but we in Africa, we have values too. So I must say, on this point, I think we should reflect more.
Andrei, what's in your crystal ball 5 years from today?
5 years from today, I think that what happens now, when the world entered a new stage and what's happening in my country has now become a game changer for the whole continent, definitely these consequences definitely will have a long-term effect. Many things that are going to happen will be influenced by today's development and future developments. Not only in the European continent, but in all other continents too. On the one side, I can predict that in 5 years' time, we could possibly report some positive results in building new alliances when it comes to education, when it comes to academia freedom. But at the same time, we could also report on some new initiatives that by that time could have successfully be implemented in the process. On the other side, definitely there will be the same problems that we face now when it comes to academia, freedom, and many others, and probably we will face some new ones. So the general situation, the general situation now will definitely influence. Definitely influence the situation. It will have a long-term effect.
So we are soon to conclude this interesting discussion. I would like, and I'll start with you. You'll be last because I have some special questions for you. But Sophia, when the audience, the people in this room and the big crowds who are online, when they go to bed tonight and they think of this interesting discussion that I listened to today, what do you want them to remember?
Well, I can be very brief. I think we are always stronger together. It's better to cooperate. And certainly from the university side, this is full of opportunities. And if you think of the opportunities that you have as both working perhaps these institutions. There are much more potential now for cooperating across borders, but also as an individual. If you have not yet taken the opportunity to to have an experience, a learning mobility experience, you can do that also as an adult. And I would really encourage as many as possible to look out for this fascinating opportunities that we have in our programs. And all in all, I just picked up, my feeling is also that having this conversation in the physical format, I must give the credit that it really creates a very important and dynamic atmosphere, a lot of energy. So thanks a lot for inviting me to this conversation.
And Andrei, what's your message?
My message is very brief. It's not my words. It's an old Chinese wording that crisis provides new opportunities. So it means that these difficult times, they definitely should provide new opportunities for us to deepen our cooperation when it comes to education, when it comes to academic exchange. And at the same time, try to do better, try to find new things that can be studied and try to achieve new progress.
And Ole Petter, some final remarks from you as this year's edition of the World Academic Forum Stockholm Summit soon comes to a close. And the questions are quite leading, I have to admit, but you treat them the way you want. What are your feelings towards the idea to invite academics from all over the world representing all kinds of disciplines to Stockholm, like we've seen before this session and during this session as well?
I think we are back to what universities are all for. What is the point of having academia and universities? To have this dialogue across geographical borders, across disciplines, and with an honest vision of the future, which is a difficult future. We are living in a turbulent world, and there are many signs that the turbulence will persist and perhaps increase. We're not just talking about war and conflicts. We are talking about major challenges, climate, poverty, which is on the increase now after this war began. So I think the essence is exactly what we're trying to live up to here, to have an academic dialogue with a richness of perspectives that perhaps next time around also imply that you invite people from other continents to this dialogue.
And one last question, I don't know if it's not that easy maybe to answer, but if you could choose, what would be your dream topic to address in next edition of Stockholm Summit? Just like that.
I think it follows from what my colleagues here in this debate also have brought to the table. 2 words: responsible internationalization. That is what we need. We have to proceed with our international collaborations, but in a responsible way and based on reflections. Because, as the ambassador pointed out, there is no yes or no, for example, when it comes to collaboration with Russia. These are all shades of gray. And to understand all these shades of gray, there is no way we can avoid basing our discussions on this academic dialogue. This is what we need.
Dear panelists, it has been a true honor to moderate this debate with the 3 of you, and please give a big hand to the 3. Thank you very much. Thank you, and that concludes this session. Thank you so much.